right? We think that. But Theodore Adorno, one of the most important sociologists of all time, wrote this wonderful piece called Free Time that clued me in really early to the idea that what we're calling free time on the weekend is recreational time. But what is it recreating? What is it recreating, right? When we say recreational activities, the words recreate are in those words, right? So what is being recreated? Our ability to go back to work, which is to say our labor power, right? In a society where you're seen as nothing but a worker, you are a standing reserve of labor power, which requires everything in the schooling apparatus to groom you to become nothing but a worker for the rest of your life. Whether you're going to see yourself as a deserving professional or manager, or whether you're going to see yourself as an undeserving, lowly, unskilled, as they say, kind of worker. In either of these cases, you've been reduced to that. We've all been reduced to that, right? So the point is to say, yes, I have time this weekend, but I don't have time energy. Well, without time energy, you can still do lots of really cool stuff on the weekend because you have time that doesn't have energy, or you have energy that doesn't have the kind of time that can be repeatedly harnessed or relied upon to develop your skills. Learning another language, learning to play the violin and kill it, or getting into almost any of the higher sort of aspirations that free human beings throughout history have pursued, requires large energy infused repeatable blocks of time throughout the week. You don't just say, oh, I've got a couple free hours. Sweet, what do I want to do right now? Oh, I'm going to take up the violin. Why don't you do that? Well, because you're not going to have time like that with that kind of energy the following day or the following week. It's not reliable, right? So that's what I'm trying to get at with this concept. So how does it relate to schooling and schooling? The idea is that schooling is training us up to be labor power on call, on demand, constantly modulating ourselves to make ourselves slightly more competitive than our peers so that we'll be able to get the job, right? As opposed to schooling, which is this idea of leisure, which, as we said, was comfortable and unconstrained time. Do you have that? Well, there's a certain kind of person who had that, and they were the so-called, like, I guess, almost forefathers of Western civilization, right? They were the ancient Greeks, right, in Athens. Well, there's a reason that they had their leisure time, and it's because they had slaves and because women didn't have rights, right? They got to sit around and play political games and play fight and make music and dance and just really, like, they just had disposable time to kill together, right? And of course, the reason that they could do that was because this thing called home economics was managed by their wives, and their wives were managing who? Slaves, right? A terrible situation. I'm sure most of you do not approve. Probably none of you, right? Does anybody think that that was a great situation? Okay, I don't think anyone here approves of that situation, right? Well, we in this very loose sense, right? Because we're, in the United States, supposedly abolished slavery, right? At some point in history. And it was a particularly vile kind of slavery because it was racialized, right? In previous iterations or throughout history, slavery was not necessarily racialized. It was often like, okay, the ancient Greeks, they went and they conquered the neighboring people. And at the end of the war, they said, it's your life or you work for my wife. That's the deal. And people say, okay, I'll work for your wife, man. All right. And that was the situation. Well, we abolished a different kind of slavery, obviously. And we loosely, right? And of course, it wasn't really abolished in a strict sense. But what I say in my book is actually that we universalized it for everybody. Because this idea of skole, of unconstrained, comfortable time, is not something anyone gets to experience. All of us spend all of our time developing ourselves to become slightly more competitive workers, or we're relaxing in a way that we hope will give us our energy back so that we can get back to work when the new week begins. The Western conception of freedom, then, of otium or skole, both of these words are synonymous, they both mean leisure time, is one that none of us get. None of us get it. And of course, every new year, you're supposed to make goals. What kind of person do you want to be? How are you going to do better this year? And you think, I'm going to learn another language. I'm going to go on a run 3 times a week. I'm going to do all these different things, many of which actually fall under the domain of the liberating arts, as Anne was calling it, right? We want more than just what we've been, and we feel kind of shitty at the end of the year because we're like, man, I really could be more. I really could do better. And part of the point is to say, it's not wholly on you. In part, yes, you can. We can all individually always do better, blah, blah, blah. We all have this idea of the ideal student. Sure, we could be better. But there are structural issues making it impossible to be a free human being. Because a free human being would have large, energy-infused, repeatable blocks of time reliably throughout their week so that they say, you know what, I'm going to learn the violin. You know what, I'm going to learn Spanish and French and German and Chinese and Japanese. I'm going to learn it all. Leonardo da Vinci, Rene Descartes, Galileo, Newton. These are just a few names of significant intellectual forces in our lives. Now, we don't usually think about them, but the culture, insofar as we've inherited it, as well as science and technology, largely come from guys like that. And I say guys because guys had a special kind of freedom. It wasn't just the freedom of time energy. It was also the freedom of mentorship in the liberating arts so that they could become what's called a polymath. People in my discussion groups know about this. Polymaths. Polymaths do not come out of a schooling system where you sit in groups of 25 or 100 students and then you get examined. No, it comes out of these kinds of people who are able to speak between 5 and 15 languages and who are able to make significant advances in all of the maths, all of the sciences, all of the areas of philosophy, all of the areas of sociology and anthropology. How are they able to do that, we think? It seems so impossible. They must have been geniuses. They weren't geniuses. Well, maybe they were, but the precondition was there. The preconditions for the good life were at their disposal. And maybe other people in their situation, in a similar class standing, didn't make this kind of contribution that they did. But they had the freedom to choose what they wanted to do during that time. We go, my God, I'm an American. I'm so stupid. I only speak one language. And we hate ourselves because we only speak one language and there's a Mexican family right down the street and we can't even communicate with them. What the hell, right? Everyone else in the world speaks 2 or 3 languages, minimum. So of course we beat ourselves up, stupid Americans. Yeah, well, there's a reason that we're stupid Americans. And it's because we've been told the only purpose in life is to sell all of our waking moments either to making ourselves into labor power or trying to rest up so that we can face the next week again and just repeat that until we die. That's called drudgery. And in this ancient conception of freedom, it's also called slavery, right? Now, there's obviously slavery as direct domination and subjugating somebody else to do all of the things for you, but they also called it slavish to be preoccupied with necessary labor.